My name is Walter Emmett Bradshaw. I'm 82 years old, and I'm sitting in a chair that I've sat in every morning for the last 11 years. The same chair, the same window, the same light coming in at the same angle. I notice things like that now. I didn't used to. I don't know exactly why I'm recording this. My granddaughter showed me how to use this thing a few months ago. She thought I might want to talk about my life. She said people listen. She said it might help someone. I don't know about that. I think I just need to say it out loud. Even if no one hears it. Even if the whole thing sits on a server somewhere and no one ever presses play. Some things need to leave the body before the body gives out. I was a good man. I want to say that clearly. Not to defend myself, but because it matters to what I'm about to tell you. I paid my bills. I showed up to work. I coached Little League for 6 years. I shoveled my neighbor's walk every winter without being asked. Good. Reliable. Steady. Those were the words people used for me. And I held on to those words like they were proof of something. Like being steady was the same as being present. Like reliability was the same as love. It took me a very long time to understand that it isn't. The room I'm talking about was in a house we rented in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. A yellow house on Clement Street. Small yard. Leaky faucet in the bathroom that I kept meaning to fix. We moved there in 1987. Margaret and I. Her son Daniel was 9. Our daughter Claire was 6. I remember the smell of that house. Old wood and something faintly like lavender. Margaret had put a sachet in the hallway closet. I remember thinking it was too much. I remember saying so. I said a lot of things like that back then. Too much. Too loud. Too expensive. Too sentimental. I had opinions about everything and feelings about almost nothing, or that's what it looked like from the outside. From the inside, I'm not sure I knew the difference. It was a Tuesday evening in March. I know it was March because the snow had just started melting and there was that particular kind of mud, gray and heavy, along the edges of the driveway. Margaret and I had been arguing. Not a dramatic argument. Not the kind you see in films where things get thrown and doors slam and someone says something they can never take back. Ours was quieter than that. Ours was the kind of argument that had been happening for years, just under the surface. The same argument dressed in different clothes depending on the week. That night it was about money, or it started about money, and then it became about something else. She said I wasn't there. Not physically. She knew I was physically there. She meant something harder to explain. She said when she talked to me it felt like talking to someone standing behind class. I didn't understand what she meant. Or maybe I understood and didn't want to. I told her she was being dramatic. I used that word. Dramatic, and I watched something shift in her face. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something that looked, only now looking back, like a decision being made. I walked out of the room. We stayed together. Margaret and I. Another 6 years in that house, and then we moved to Columbus when my company transferred me, and then eventually here, to this smaller place, after the kids were gone and the mortgage felt too heavy to justify. We stayed together for 31 more years after that Tuesday in March. And in those 31 years, Margaret tried to reach me. I see that now. She tried in ways I didn't recognize as trying. She'd suggest we take a drive with nowhere particular to go.
She'd leave books on my nightstand, the kind with characters who were struggling with things like loneliness inside of marriage. She'd ask me questions at dinner, real questions, and wait longer than was comfortable for an answer. I would answer eventually. Practical answers. Safe answers. The kind of answers that close a door gently instead of slamming it. I didn't understand what she meant. Or maybe I understood and didn't want to. I told her she was being dramatic. I used that word. Dramatic, and I watched something shift in her face. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Something that looked, only now looking back, like a decision being made. I walked out of the room. I went to the garage. I had a workbench out there, half-finished projects, tools I'd organized and reorganized 100 times. I stood at that bench for maybe 40 minutes. I wasn't doing anything. I was just standing there holding a wrench I didn't need. And then I came back inside. But I want to be precise about something. I came back inside the house. I'm not sure I ever fully came back into that room. Long breath. We stayed together, Margaret and I, another 6 years in that house, and then we moved to Columbus when my company transferred me, and then eventually here, to this smaller place, after the kids were gone and the mortgage felt too heavy to justify. We stayed together for 31 more years after that Tuesday in March. And in those 31 years, Margaret tried to reach me. I see that now. She tried in ways I didn't recognize as trying. She'd suggest we take a drive with nowhere particular to go. She'd leave books on my nightstand, the kind with characters who were struggling with things like loneliness inside of marriage. She'd ask me questions at dinner, real questions, and wait longer than was comfortable for an answer. I would answer eventually. Practical answers. Safe answers. The kind of answers that close a door gently instead of slamming it. Daniel is 54 now. He lives in Oregon. He calls on Sundays, usually around noon. We talk about the weather, his work, his kids. He's a good man. Steady. Reliable. I heard those words in him once and felt proud. Later I heard them and felt something else. Claire lives closer. She visits. She sits with me in this room sometimes and we watch whatever is on without really watching it. She's more like Margaret than she knows. That same quality of waiting, of hoping you'll say something real. I'm still not always sure how. Margaret died 4 years ago. February. Cold and gray and unremarkable in the way that the worst days sometimes are. She had been sick for 2 years before that, and in those 2 years something happened between us that I don't have clean language for. We got quieter. Not the bad kind of quiet. A different kind. The kind where you stop performing steadiness and just sit. She'd hold my hand in the evening. I'd sit on the edge of her bed and we wouldn't say much, and it was the closest I felt to her in decades. That's the part that undoes me. That it took her dying for me to stop standing behind class. End of part 1. Continues at a natural pause. I've thought about that a lot. About why it took so long. I don't think I was a cold man by nature. I think I was a frightened one. Frightened of saying the wrong thing, of being seen needing something, of opening a door and not knowing what was on the other side of it. Fear dressed up as steadiness. For decades. There was a night, maybe 8 months before she passed, when Margaret couldn't sleep. She'd been having trouble with the medication and the nights were difficult for her. I got up and sat beside her, and she looked at me in the dark and she said, "Walter, I always thought you'd get there eventually." I asked her what she meant. She said, "To the real part." She smiled when she said it. Not sad, just honest in the way she'd always been honest, which I had spent years calling dramatic. I didn't say anything back. I held her hand, and in the morning I pretended I hadn't heard it clearly. But I had heard it. I've heard it every day since. Pause. I want to try to explain what I mean when I say I never fully returned to that room. It's not that I was absent. I was at every birthday, every graduation, every Christmas. I drove people to the hospital and picked them up. I fixed things when they broke. I did what needed doing. But there's a difference between being in a room and inhabiting it. There's a difference between presence and participation. I moved through rooms. I didn't settle into them. I kept some part of myself always slightly to the side, always ready to leave, always closer to the door than to the center of things. I thought that made me independent. I think now it made me lonely. And I think it made the people around me lonely too, which is the harder thing to carry. Daniel called last Sunday. We talked for 20 minutes. At the end he said, "Dad, you okay?" I said,